Bounty hunting is not for the faint of heart. You learn quick out here. It's not about who's the fastest on the draw. It's about who's prepared and who's still breathing when the dust settles. Takes years to build the skills, the instincts. You need the gear to back it up, and the right ship to keep you in the game. And that's where mine comes in. The Manticore. She might have started life as a stock SGV-52 Light Freighter, but I turned her into something else entirely. LEC's been my go-to for years. They don't just make ships, they make foundations. And the SGV-52, it was worth building on. I kept the Galvatron sublight engines, but I added my own touch. Quantum boost tanks, wired straight into the RD4 mag inertial reactor. Gives her a sharper throttle curve and a little extra kick when I need to close a gap. Out here, speed's not a luxury, it's survival. Now she came with a solid weapon suite, twin MT-55 laser cannons, and proton torpedo launchers. That's good enough for freight runs, not for me. So I fitted a pair of rapid-fire KLR 39mm autocannons and a dorsal traction turret for insurance. Is she overarmed? Maybe. And do I care? No, not at all. As far as the inside goes, I reworked the lower deck. What used to be a cargo hold is now my armory and suit bay, plus 2 holding cells. Everything I need to bring a bounty in alive or KIA. And the main deck's my workspace. It's compact and efficient. Now, I prefer to work alone, but when the job calls for backup, she's got the room for it. Range is the name of the game, and the Manticore has it. Enough to move between systems without begging for a refuel every few jumps. I also upgraded the stock shield systems with an HMF generator, but she holds strong even under concentrated fire. Believe me, she's been tested more than once. The SGV-52's strongest trait is versatility. Smuggling cargo, passenger transport, and even VIP escort jobs. It's all possible. That's why I chose it as the foundation for the Manticore. For us bounty hunters, having the right ship goes a long way. And I'll admit, some ships do make a statement, but the Manticore doesn't need to. Because when she gets the job done, you will remember her name.
Alright shipwrights, welcome to another LEC build. AEC Deimos is the name of the game, and I've got another ship build that features these parts. It's called the Manticore, and it's a modified SGV-52 Light Freighter. Now let's get into some quick ship lore. Designed as a Class B multi-role transport, the SGV-52 Light Freighter was developed to serve a range of civilian needs, from light cargo hauling and passenger transport to long-range escort and exploration duties. A highly adaptable platform has made the SGV-52 Light Freighter a favorite among frontier traders, smugglers, and bounty hunters seeking a reliable ship that can be tuned for their own purposes. The Manticore is a heavily modified SGV-52 owned and operated by lonewolf bounty hunter Miles Soren, who purchased the freighter stock from a secondhand dealer sometime in 2308 and immediately started to make upgrades to the ship, primarily focusing on performance, firepower, and counterintelligence hardware. When I was building out the VCX-100, I was really debating whether I should go with an actual recreation or just lean into my usual inspired builds. Ultimately, I went the recreation route, but I'll be honest, I'm not exactly the biggest fan of the VCX-100 ship design because I think it looks a bit too clunky. So this SGV-52 Manticore is an inspired take on the VCX-100, but with my preferred design choices. The overall profile of this ship was inspired by a few custom Corellian-themed ships that I found on Pinterest, which by the way is a great resource for ship inspiration if you ever need any. Now altogether this ship will cost just under 1.94 million credits. As usual, a majority of the budget is tied to the Matilia weapons and components. In this case, the Matilia engines, components, and weapons cost 1,467,000 credits, which is about 3/4 of the entire build cost. So if that's too much, you can easily swap these parts out. There's some other optional parts that increase the overall price, like the bad tech cargo hold version of the Deimos belly, which is significantly more expensive than the standard belly. And because I used a one-ship weapon power mod, we're able to install 6 smaller 107 autocannons instead of what would normally be 4. And these autocannons cost a little over 31k each. The dorsal mounted turret is actually a decorative weapon, so it's not functional. I just wanted to add a 4th weapon for lore purposes. At 54 meters long and 48 meters wide, this ship is a mid-sized build for Starfield standards, and it happens to be the exact same dimensions as the VCX-100 build. Something you should know about the build process. There's going to be a few instances where leveling out sections of the ship on the Y-axis will prove to be a huge problem since we use so many Gillibrand Hab snaps. One thing you can do to level parts at the right height is to use an Avantech wing. These wings stack at a fraction of the normal Hab height, so if you highlight another part with it, the duplication will follow the Avantech wing spacing. Sometimes the parts jump too high, but you just need to lower it a level and it'll snap into place. You can also do this for built-out sections as well by highlighting all the parts in that section. Then select the Avantech wing and duplicate upwards. If a Hab snap is involved, shift it diagonally to the right or left. This will set the parts at a half step of whatever Hab snap size you're using. Now since you're duplicating parts, you need to make sure that the shipbuilding terminal or vendor that you're at has the parts that you need to duplicate, otherwise this won't work. I'm using a mod that adds a ship terminal to New Homestead that has all the vanilla and modded parts outside of Falkland systems, so I'm pretty much able to duplicate any part at this specific shipbuilding terminal. Another thing I want to mention is that the side dockers on this ship are dummy dockers, so they're not functional. I am not exactly sure which mod these come from. My bad there. I tried looking through my load order and I couldn't really pinpoint which one it is. So I'll get my load order uploaded, that way you guys can copy what I have and then hopefully you can get it that way. And this build does use AEC Deimos, which is a paid mod. So if you only use Nexus mods, this guide won't exactly work for you, though you can still build out the same ship using Intrinity Aeroworks parts. It's going to take some creativity to piece it all together, but my suggestion is to use the Intrinity Aeroworks parts to shape out the whole of the ship, and then figure out what parts you want to use to connect them to the fuselage of the ship. The build process is decently straightforward. There's nothing really too complicated with it. The only tough parts are really going to be leveling out certain sections of the ship at the right height level. So if you need to, just use that tip that I mentioned earlier with the Avantech wings, and you should be able to get the parts at the right height level. Of course, if you have any questions or if you get stuck anywhere, feel free to reach out to me in the comments. Alright, if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. Apologies for the raspiness in my voice. My buddy's bachelor party was last weekend and my voice has been gone all week. Anyways, hopefully this build went without a hitch. I know there's probably some areas that might have been a bit troublesome, especially when it comes to leveling out parts on the y-axis. But again, use that tip that I mentioned with the Avantech wings and you should be able to get that result. Also, I've been late on uploading the last 2 videos and this will probably be a continued trend until the end of the year. I'm still targeting a video a week, but realistically it'll probably be every week and a half-ish. I'm just a bit busy right now, so bear with me here. Speaking of which, my next video will be a bounty hunter themed ship for No Man's Sky. For Starfield, I'll be doing at least a couple of Star Citizen builds, but I think I'm also going to mix in another original build in between. As always, feel free to reach out to me in the comments if you have any questions or build requests, or if you just want to chat all things Starfield and No Man's Sky shipbuilding. This is Lindan signing off. See you in the Starfield.